debate and discuss some of the conclusions from this report. So I really hope that in that context we can continue this discussion, not least in the fora that Paul mentioned around the DAC CSO dialogue going forward. So I am the head of a division called READY, Peer Reviews, Results, Evaluation and Development Innovation, and I speak from the very particular sort of vantage point that that body of work gives us in terms of an understanding of and access to the workings of DAC members. In addition to that work, we also in this division produce the flagship Development Cooperation Report, which is an annual report, and in December 2018 we released the 2018 report, which is focused on really delivering on the pledge to leave no one behind. And I would like to sort of cross-reference some of my comments and remarks to some of the recommendations that we're making in that report, because there's quite a strong sort of alignment between the two. I'll structure my comments on two sort of blocks, one on the well, particularly around the political overview and what that tells us in terms of the narrative for development cooperation. And secondly, I want to touch on some elements of what is described as the fit for purpose agenda. But let me also be clear that I am not speaking for the DAC, and I'm sure all the DAC delegates in the room would want me to say that. I'm not speaking for the DAC. I speak now mostly as an OECD official, partly as an individual that is passionate about these issues and about making sure that all the means of development cooperation are really working towards an end of sustainable development, and also partly, I would say, as, for want of a better phrase, a devil's advocate, because I think that's the job of providing some commentary on a report like this. So I will play some function of being a devil's advocate as well. On the narrative, I think firstly we can all agree that ODA has unique characteristics, and I think we can all agree that it has a unique contribution in the context of the 2030 agenda. We live in an interdependent world, but one that is clearly ravaged by serious global challenges, and also one that's suffering from inequalities both between and within borders. So I think it's absolutely right that the Reality of Aid report is locating development cooperation and seeking to create an agenda around refreshing development cooperation in that context. But I would also say that the context is one, or the narrative around development cooperation is also one that is around everyone standing to lose if we don't put the right tools and policies in place to deal with those challenges at the global, the regional and the local levels. Secondly, I think it's very important to continue to shine the light on ODA levels and the gap between commitments and the reality today, and that's something certainly that we do at the OECD on a regular basis. And then thirdly, I think we should also acknowledge, as the Reality of Aid report does, that this is a contested terrain. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. It's a contested terrain. The mandate is extremely clear. The mandate was renewed last year in terms of ODA as a public good that promotes economic development and welfare in developing countries in line with the SDGs. And I think it's important that we do continue to talk about the safeguards that are needed to be put in place in order to ensure that we're not straying from that mandate. And I would also just plug the DAC peer reviews as being one mechanism that consistently seeks to do that. However, in relation to the narrative, I personally would choose to strike a slightly more optimistic note on two fronts. Firstly, I don't think that we should be reading into discussions around the catalytic use of ODA that somehow ODA is being relegated as a diminished or a marginalised or an irrelevant development finance flow, and I use the words of the Reality of Aid report. I don't think we should be reading into that or making that correlation. It's not irrelevant, it's not marginalised, it's not being dismissed. And I think that messaging doesn't really resonate with the many sort of multi-stakeholder conversations that are going on a daily basis in DAC member countries. Nor do I think that necessarily does justice to the immense value that is being added by ODA in some of the most difficult environments and on some of the most sort of binding constraints to development, including in supporting developing countries in transitioning to low emission, climate resilient development pathways, and in promoting gender equality and women's empowerment. Secondly, I don't think we should dismiss what is being